Hello everyone and welcome to 2018! Yay! So this is a new kind of class and it's called Strategy Session. And today on Strategy Session I will show you how to beat the London. This is actually part of my New Year's resolution, to render this London system into a London defense for white. Alright, so d4, knight f6, knight f3, g6. Can someone help me with the first few hundred moves from white? Yes?
Then bishop f.
Yes, bishop f4, bishop g7.
And then d3.
No, d3 is not possible.
E3.
e3, yes. d6.
And then bishop to d3 or knight
Yeah.
to d.
Yes, so bishop d3, knight d2. But we're going to look at this from a theoretical point of view this time. And my threat with black is to play this knight h5 jump and then just to continue with h5, g5. So if you don't play h3, let's say you play knight d2, I get to play knight h5. And after bishop g5, h6, I get to trap your bishop and get the bishop pair. Now that's the reason Kamsky and others, following his footsteps, play h3. Castle, c3, c5. Many people who first encountered this opening, meaning the London system with black, usually go for this idea of e5. I mean, this idea of e5. But it's not quite good here, as it would just improve the scope of this bishop. This bishop on f4, and would have this powerful grip on this long diagonal later. So therefore, c5 is the good move. And it's an exclam, because you should be pushing on the queen side with black. Now, I'm just going to first show the first boring lines that white can play. It's not much fun, but we have to deal with those. D takes c5, d takes c5, takes, rook takes d8, bishop c7. Now, this looks very equal for the untrained eye, yet black might have slight issues. What could be those slight issues that black could face? What is a little bit over advanced for black? Yeah?
That bishop has the whole diagonal.
Well, yeah, the bishop has the whole diagonal, but that wasn't the point. The point was that the pawn on c5 is a little bit overextended and could become weak. So rook d7, we're chasing away the bishop, bishop h2. But actually that was the aim of this bishop sortie anyways. He wanted to have our rook in this awkward position. So therefore, black plays rook d8, which is kind of a paradoxical idea. But the point is, if black will play knight c6, white might go bishop b5, and that could be uncomfortable. So rook d8, knight d2, and knight c6 now. a4, and now black plays bishop f5. Bishop b5 is a line played by Kamsky option, but knight e4 is fine. g4 takes, bishop e6. Now I'm sure you wonder why white wouldn't take on c6. Well, that would just open up this diagonal on the b line, and that would be to an advantage of black. And with these two bishops hitting the black queen side, this position is more than enough compensation for the doubled pawns. So Kamsky castles, rook c8, rook g1, a6, takes, rook takes c6. And this position is equal. This was played between Kamsky and Dobrov But black's plan is to go rook c8, b5, b4, and just to advance on the queen side. This position is roughly equal because of the bishop pair and the advantage on the queen side for black. That's one of the ways. a4, bishop f5, or white could play g4 here. And this happened in the game between Kamsky and Korchnoi. So g4 was played, and here we have to make a strategic decision, which I'd like you viewers and viewers here to find. This is kind of a closed position, very typical of the London system. The first question that comes up is, which piece is worth more in closed position, the bishop or the knight? The knight. So here, black has to decide what he wants to exchange for what. Yeah, bishop e4 is very good, and that's what Korchnoi played. The idea being, he wants to exchange the bishop for the knight, and in closed positions, in the long term, that will favor him. So knight takes e4, knight takes e4, bishop g2, rook c8, a5. And Korchnoi found a very nice idea in this position. Can you please raise your hand if you have an idea?
I was thinking about c4.
Yes, c4, that's interesting, but it gives away the d4 square.
Yeah, my idea was to go c5.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Oh,
Yeah?
knight takes c3,
Yes, exactly. And if I take back?
and then bishop takes at c3 check,
Mm-hmm. King e2.
and then bishop takes at a
Yeah.
1.
Yes. And this is exactly what happened in the game. Now black played b5, a takes b6, a takes b6. And black has a lot of compensation here as these pawns will start strolling down. And in the game, it eventually ended in a draw. After not much of a fight, in like 10 moves, it all boiled down to an equal position. So, all in all, this is the basic thing you need to know just before you start playing this system against the London. Bishop g7, d6, castles, c5. This is kind of the tabia position you need to know with black. And after d takes, take, bishop c7, rook d7, bishop h2. The key move is rook d8, noticing that white is aiming to put the bishop on b5. So just avoiding this idea of the pin. And after knight d2, knight c6, a4, bishop f5, black is just fine. Now, let's look at some games. And I know you'll be surprised. Why am I showing a game played by Korchnoi against Polugaevsky when he's white? Well, you'll see, because he actually nails down the concept you need to know to play this setup with black. So knight f3, knight f6, g3, bishop g2, c6, castles, bishop f5, d3, h6. And if you would turn the table around, this might seem familiar, right?
Yeah, it's the London system.
It's the London system reversed, yeah? So basically, Korchnoi is playing the line I'm recommending for you. So what should white play in this position?
C4.
Yeah?
C4.
Yeah, c4, of course. e6. And now the difference is, we were looking at lines with reversed colors when black was taking on c4, right? Takes, this lines. We were looking at these kind of lines with a tempo up, right? But now, black decides to play e6. And the first question is, how should we attack black's position? What would be our first thought? Which is the weakest spot in black's position? Yep, the b7. b7 pawn is extremely weak.
Queen b3. Also, queen b3.
Yeah, queen b3 is an idea. The only issue is with queen b3 that black can play queen b6, and then it's roughly equal. Now, Korchnoi also realized that and thought, if I could stop black from playing queen b6, and then I could play queen b3, I might just have a remarkable position.
Bishop.
Yeah?
Bishop e3.
Bishop e3, yes. Because if white plays queen b3 now, then queen b6, bishop e3, and takes a6, and this is an okay position for black. Therefore, Korchnoi came up with this idea of bishop e3, which will be key with black as well. So this is the key concept of the whole setup I'm suggesting. Bishop e7, queen b3, queen c8, knight c3, castle, rook c1. And now we can see that we're in total domination right now, because this pawn is threatening to take on c5, while the black queen is an x-ray. And also, black will have a hard time moving around. Bishop h7, c takes d5, e takes d5. And white has a dominating position, but is one weakness enough to win a game?
No.
No. We need to open up a second front to actually win. So Korchnoi thought about it and came up with a good solution. He played bishop d4 after bishop d6, bishop d6, bishop d4. What is white preparing in this position? What? Yeah? e4, yes, of course. White is preparing the idea of e4, and if white would get these pawns rolling on e4 and f4, it's just a matter of time when he will win. Bishop c7, and whenever tactics work for you, that means you did something right. So c5 would generally win a piece in positions like this, but because of this x-ray set up by this rook, knight takes d5 works, and white is just dead winning. So bishop c7, e4, takes, knight a6, knight c4, already hinting at ideas of e5. Knight d7. Now always look for counterplay from black. What is black kind of preparing with this knight d7 move?
Oh,
Yeah?
knight c5.
Knight c5 is one of those ideas black is preparing, but there's a sneaky Slav-like idea hiding in this position as well.
How about b5?
Yeah, b5 is a very good idea. Black is actually threatening b5 with the idea of rolling down with c5, c4. So, for example, if I would play rook fd1 here, b5 could come, knight d2 and c5, and black could get some kind of counter chances. Although it's a little bit risky because these pawns can get a little bit weak. But b5 is a threat, so therefore Korchnoi played a4, stopping all these tricks. And as you said, knight c5 comes, but Korchnoi was prepared for this and played queen a3. And usually the queen stands stupidly on a3, but in these type of positions, the queen is more comfortable putting pressure on the d6 square and the c5 knight, rather than hiding behind the pawns. This c8 queen is much worse than this queen, which is kind of comfortable on a3 right now. Knight e6, bishop e3. Obviously, we don't want to give away our bishops because they're very important in these open positions. And this is a huge opening triumph for white, and we're kind of dreaming of such a scenario when we're black. Knight b6, knight d5. I mean with reverse colors, of course. Knight b6, knight d5. Tremendous tactical idea by Korchnoi. Knight takes. Well, if takes with the pawn, can go e takes d5, knight g5, and d6. The bishop cannot move because knight b6. And if knight takes c4, I just take back. And if bishop takes, then takes, and I take, and I take. And I have a very nice bishop pair in this position. Or I could maybe even take first and play d6. Both positions are very good for white. So knight takes c4 happened, rook takes c4, queen d8, knight c7, queen takes c7. And now we have the nice little bishop pair and a bit of a pawn majority on the king side. b4, queen e7, queen c3, rook d8, f4. Notice that just because white has so much space, he can do basically anything. He can advance on both sides while also kind of dampening this bishop on h7. That is, dampening this bishop. f6, b5. What's the idea of b5? Because that's an aggressive move with a strategic idea behind it. Can anybody explain what is it? Yeah, he's trying to weaken the c6 square, and it's also a minority attack. So c takes, a takes b5, and now we have a control of a pivotal square. Which one did we get? Which is so important. The d5 square. This will be very useful later on. Rook d7, rook c8, takes, knight f8, queen c4. Queen e6, takes. Now, actually this position could be already winning for white. Can somebody tell me why could we say this up front?
White has two bishops while black has a bishop and a knight.
And
Yes, that's one of the reasons.
also,
Yeah?
it's started, the bishop on e3 is also starting a7.
Yeah. So basically we have plenty of plans on hitting on this pawn on a7, on this pawn on a7 and b7, while also having the advantage of the bishop pair, right? Yeah. So takes, it's already a pawn, bishop h3, knight e2, king e3, and now black out of desperation goes for this knight journey, but it won't last long. Rook d1, and the deadly threat of rook d8 is fairly hard to very hard to parry. g5, rook d8, bishop c5, g takes, bishop g6, and black resigned, which is understandable as the simple rook d7 check is winning, king h8, and I just take b7. So what we learned from this game, if you're able to force your opponent queen on the first rank, you might be able to get an advantage. Now let's see if this is possible to do with the black colors. Black's mistake was playing passively. White played a perfect game. So this game is between Kamsky and Joel Benjamin. g6, bishop f4, same old London that is going to get refuted now. e3, h3, c5. Notice Joel Benjamin with black starts to attack the center as quickly as possible. Because after d takes c5 here, we have a stronger move than d takes c5. Queen a5 check, the logical move. And after c3, queen takes c5, white just has an equal position, but black is fairly comfortable here. So c3, c takes d4, already putting pressure on this structure. E takes d4, and now castle, bishop e2, and here Joel Benjamin finds the move that will put white in big trouble. And it's more of a strategical way of playing this position. Yes?
Queen b6?
Queen b6, then I play queen b3. That will not work. Any ideas how I could do damage to white's position here? Using the strategic plan that we just learned with reversed colors. Yeah, bishop e6. And the idea is the simple thing of taking away the b3 square. Castles, queen b3. And there's no more opposition that would be so useful for white. Queen c1. Queen c2 is an idea, but that could run into tricks like knight c6, knight d2, rook c8. And let's say after rook e1, jumps like knight b4. And even this nice little trick of knight takes d4. Because if takes, queen takes. And pawn takes runs into rook takes c2. And there's no way of catching the queen. The queen just runs away, either to e5 or d5. And also I was threatening knight b4. So if nothing else works, knight b4 is still very strong. So Kamsky chose queen c1, knight c6, knight a3, rook c8, rook e1, bishop d5. I hope this position is familiar right now. And it won't be surprising if black's plan is e5, yes. So black is planning, just like in the aforementioned Korchnoi game, to play e5. Knight c2, bishop e4. Bishop e4 is a very strong move by Joel Benjamin, threatening with a really nice trap. What is black threatening now? Bishop, let's say a3. Queen takes. Yeah, and again, we have this very nice trick of knight takes, queen takes d4. So this is a good thing, a good trick to remember. Bishop e4, but Kamsky obviously doesn't fall for that, plays bishop d1. Rook e8. Now, in general in these King's Indian London defense positions, we have to be patient, because you have to prepare the idea of e5 before actually executing it. If you play e5 too early, you might actually lose the pawn. This would be a loss of a pawn right now. So black plays a waiting move and prepares this idea of e5. Knight g5, bishop d5. Again, black doesn't really want to get rid of his bishop. He's waiting for the right time. Bishop f3. And how should we continue here? What? H6, that would have a little bit weakened our structure, because through H6 they take on D5, knight D5, and our structure is a little bit iffy. I think E5 should be, it was due time, because if you see your opponent's pieces jumbled up, and these pieces are quite badly placed at the moment, like these are not ideally placed, that's the moment to strike. So when your opponent's pieces are just in their initial position, they will put up a fight. But when they're scattered, it's just the right time to play E5 then. All right? d takes e5, d takes e5, bishop e3. And notice we generally want to take with the pawn, as if we would take with the knight, we would be saddened by this very weak pawn, an isolated pawn on d6. So we want to take with the d pawn if possible. Bishop e3. Where should we bring our queen? Where? a6. Yeah, that would be a little bit too much to bring the queen to a6. Yeah, yeah, bishop e2 would be a problem. Yeah?
Queen c7?
Yes, queen c7. Just bolstering this pawn on e5 and this pawn on f7. Because anytime you play rook e8, this f7 pawn can become a little bit weak. So it's good to bring some defenses there. Bishop d5, knight d5. And we can see that black's play triumphed, because we have the majority on the king's side. As you remember from my lecture in Carlsen's campaign, it's important to get a majority on one side so you can play for a win. Now in this case, white is a bit too passive to claim anything and can't really use the majority on the queen side. Therefore, black is better. Rook d1, rook d8, knight f3, e4. Why doesn't black take on e3? Well, there's no concrete reason I'm not taking here. The reason I'm not taking here is more strategic. This bishop is doing nothing, right? So I'm not going to exchange it. Also, this would help this terrible piece on c2 to activate and move to d5, which I don't want to help as black, right? So that is why Benjamin avoids this exchange and just goes on to the offensive with e4. Knight e1, knight e5. And look at these mighty beasts on d5 and e5. Both are primarily placed and actually hinting at other ideas like f5, just setting up a base on the center. So white is in trouble here, right? Because all of his pieces are just on the second and first rank. Bishop h6, but here Joel Benjamin spotted a fantastic resource for him. It's black to move and win.
Oh, yeah,
e3, I'll take with the bishop. Yeah. Pieces can go backwards. That's the trick of chess. In fact, the moment you look at this position, white is overextended. What you saying? Knight takes on c3, yes. Can you repeat? Yeah. So if the pawn would take, which didn't happen, then black could take on d1 first, takes, and bishop takes h6. And black is a healthy pawn up. Now, white is forced to take on d8, and here comes the most important part of black's combination. Yep. Knight e2 check. King h1. But if king f1, black still needs to be careful here and find the right move. Yes, rook takes on d8. Yes, rook takes d8 is the correct move. Unfortunately, if we take the queen, we get checkmated. Rook takes c8, bishop f8, and then Kamsky's idea would have worked. But luckily for black, rook takes d8 just works, as when white would take on e2, queen c4 check, king e3, and we take the bishop with check and almost mate. There's still f4, but after e takes f3, it's still very bad for white.
Doesn't black win the queen?
Yeah, black wins the queen. So white was forced to play king h1, rook takes d8, and now black is a healthy pawn up again. Queen e3 takes, queen b6. Double attacking on f2 and b2. Now, you can see that with thematic play, black achieved this huge advantage. He first stopped the white queen to enter on b3, and then started rolling slowly with the idea of rook f8 and e5. The game continued with knight e3, queen takes b2, knight c2, knight d3, queen h4, rook d6. Black is in total control here. Rook f1, queen f6. So black has already a huge advantage in material, so he opts for a queen exchange. Takes, knight g4, rook c6, knight e3, f5. And naturally, as black was getting ready to promote the pawns on the king side, he's just pushing them and having the idea of playing f4, e3, kind of boxing in all the white pieces. g3, g5. There's no knight f5 because rook takes c2. Knight a3, f4, takes, knight d5, king f7, knight b5, a6. a6 is very good, trying to chase away all these knights, which might land a trick sometimes. Knight a7, rook h6, king h2, rook h5, f3, knight f5, knight c5, knight f4, and white resigned because rook h3, it's hard to parry. So in general, the game was very smoothly played by black, and the main idea that you need to remember is to post your bishop on e6 first and then go queen b6, and then you'll be forcing your opponent to the defensive, as happened to Kamsky in this game. I also wanted to show a game which features the endgame we were talking about. So this was a game played between Kamsky and Joel Benjamin again. So this is a repetition of the game we just saw, but now this time Kamsky took on c5. Takes, queen takes d8, rook takes d8, knight d2, knight c6, e4. So this was an earlier game between the two of them. Kamsky didn't play this bishop c7 idea yet. So he played instead e4. And as there's no option of bishop f5, black goes for the double fianchetto. b6, bishop b5, bishop b7. Now, how would you calibrate this position? What's your first impression? Is it equal, slightly better for someone? Just guesses. Yeah?
I like it a little bit more for white.
Well, you could argue that white is slightly better because one central pawn, for example. But it's also a weakness. So black can play against it too. So it's roughly equal, I'd say. Long castles, a6. Now, white's tragedy is that he can't make two moves and the e4 pawn is already committed. In these positions we looked at before, the reason we don't play b6 and we play bishop f5 instead is that after b6, bishop b5, bishop b7, knight c4 would come, and there's no more a6, because then white could take and would win a pawn. And there's no rook b8 because of this nasty bishop. The reason why black opts for b6 is that e4 move was already played. b6, bishop b5, castle, a6, bishop a4, b5, c4. Now, white might be even slightly better, but it's a very pleasant position for black. Black has some space on the queen side and will try to maneuver the knight to either e5 or c5. Let's see how it continues. Rook e1, rook c8, king b1, and knight d7, bishop e3. Now, white could opt for e5, but even though this is a strength, it could become a weakness as well. We could just go knight c5 here, and I'd say this is kind of fine for black. King b1, bishop e3, knight e5, takes, bishop d4. And here, Joel Benjamin finds a very nice resource. So remember that even in strategic positions, you should not forget about tactics. They're still part of the game. Yeah?
Knight to d3.
Knight to d3, I would just take you. So what's mostly annoying for black is this bishop kind of pinning us.
Oh,
Yeah? Yeah?
rook takes d4.
Rook takes d4 would be a bit too expensive. If we take on d4, c takes d4, and it's just an exchange. So the move was bishop h6. A little bit of a move hitting on d2. And the idea is to play knight c6, which wouldn't be as pleasant if we play knight c6 right now, because then he would get to exchange it, which we didn't want to happen. Any questions? Can you repeat? I don't hear you.
I've seen that in the Queen's Indian with white.
Mm-hmm.
Plays and then bishop h3.
Yeah.
Exchange.
Yeah, similar to the Queen's Indian, this bishop h3 and bishop h6 ideas can work just like here. Bishop e5, bishop d2, rook f1, f6, bishop d4, bishop f4. So black had an exposed bishop on d2, but he could get away with that because he attacked the e1 rook. Therefore, he has time to run away. g3, bishop c7, f4, and e5. And now we can state that black equalized with precise play, but it wasn't that difficult. F takes e5, f takes e5, bishop c5. So Kamsky is still trying. He's putting pressure on the f8 square. Takes, rook d8. But Joel Benjamin defends calmly. Rook f1, bishop d6, trying to get rid of that bishop. Bishop b6, rook d7, b3, king g7, king b2. Bishop c6, h4, bishop e7, rook f2. And this was an equal position, and after 20 more moves, the players agreed to a draw. Now, before I finish, I want to show another way of dealing with this system. And this game was played in the FIDE World Cup between Yuri Vovk and Wei Yi. The Wei Yi, the young grandmaster we all know from China, and who played many, many matches by now with the other big prodigy, Rapport Richard. Now, in this game, it's again a London system, surprisingly. Bishop g7, e3, castle, bishop e2. There's another method I can advise you to play. Instead of d6, c5, if you don't like that, you can always go b6, bishop b7, and do the double fianchetto. These positions are very complex, and you might as well win these games, as it will happen here. h3, bishop b7, castle, d6. So now this is a different concept. With the double fianchetto, you can go for the idea of e6 or e5. Interestingly, you can also play this double fianchetto system coming from the Nimzo-Indian. So for example, if you play with e6, bishop f4, b6, e3 here, bishop e2, g6, because of the close nature of the position, you can transpose back to this line. Castles, let's say c3 or c4, doesn't matter. Black can go d6. Plan is knight d7, queen e7, e5, knight e4, and f5. And you have a very, very lively play with black. And I think that you could have good chances of winning. Now, let's see how this game progresses. g6, e3, bishop e2, b6. This is a little bit more tactical, because as I showed the other line, white could go for an equal endgame, but this will be a bit more aggressive with more tactical struggles ahead. d6, c3, knight d7, knight d2, queen e8. So we are actually preparing the idea of e5. a4, how can we react to that, or how should we react to a4? Yeah.
Oh, a6.
a6, yes, of course. So if white would go a5, we would just push the pawn and wouldn't bother. c4, naturally, we could consider ideas like b4 with the plan of c5, or just takes on c4. But usually, after a5, b5 is just a good move. So a6, queen c2, e5. Veyi is not deterred. He's going for his aggressive plan. d takes e5, d takes e5. We want this pawn on e5. Bishop a2, bishop h2, e4, knight d4, knight e5, bringing this piece to e5. Now, in general, when white has a bishop on h2, we're trying to get rid of all of these pieces we have on this diagonal. The only exception being this knight on e5, because it's a very good blockader, and we wouldn't mind exchanging that for that black squared bishop. a5, and the move is b5, of course, c4. And now, Veyi goes gambling, but it's totally justified and played b4. In general, black has an aggressive position and should have aggressive play. If you would start exchanging, that's very bad, because white is playing a defensive setup. Every exchange is in his favor, his or her favor. So we're trying to complicate matters here. So b4, c5, bishop d5, queen a4. How should we continue if we're aiming to attack in this game? Should we take on a4? No, of course not.
Queen e7.
Queen e7, that's a move. In fact, that's what he played. Queen takes b4, knight d7, putting pressure on the c5 pawn. Rook c1, f5. Now, Veyi is showing clear intentions of mating with further ideas of f4. Queen a3, trying to play c6, but we stop it with c6. Now, this turns into a real King's Indian kind of struggle. That means black is going for mate, and if he fails, that will be of a big cost. So we have to checkmate. Knight c4. In general, would we be happy with exchanges? Should we take on c4? No, of course not. So he plays knight d3. Now the idea of knight d3 is simple. He's willing to part with the pawn in order to open up the diagonal for the bishop. Bishop d6. Now if takes, I would take, queen takes d3, I can just take on c5 and have ideas of queen g5, and black has huge play. We also have the bishop pair. So bishop d6, how should we continue if we play like a master called Mihail Tal? Yeah?
Queen f7 or queen f6.
That would, queen f7 and queen f6, they're too slow. We have to be very aggressive. We're sacrificing material. Queen g5, yes, that's the spirit. Bishop f8, rook takes f8. And notice that black mostly just takes back material and doesn't bother much. Otherwise, because he's aiming to play f4 and f3 with dire consequences for white. Especially as this f3 square will be pivotal. Knight b6. Bishop d3 wouldn't be a great idea, as he takes d3 would just help our attack. And after g3, we could consider queen h5, but f4 is also pretty strong. So knight b6, knight takes b6, c takes b6, and now black played knight c1, rook c1, and Vovk spotted that he can get the advantage quickly. How did he do that? f4. f4 is a good move, but there's a stronger one you could play here. Yeah. Bishop takes d4. Yeah, because the rook is hanging. E takes doesn't work because I just take. And I'm winning. Therefore, white took the pawn. So he's hoping to have some counter chances with these pawns, which could be the case, but Vovk doesn't back down and continues like nothing happened. So it's black to move and continue with his attack. Yep.
Bishop takes on no.
Yeah, bishop takes e3 would be a bit early.
Yeah. F4.
Yeah? What did you want to say? Okay, correct. Both is correct. f4. So the idea being, we don't care about the pieces, we just want a mate. So e takes d4 was played. Yeah?
F3.
In f3. And again, the same double attack, where he double attacks on both on c1 and on g2, g3, queen takes c1, king h2, queen d2, king g1, queen e1 check again. And white resigned because king h2 loses to queen takes f2, and bishop f1 loses to bishop c4. And therefore, Vovk won his game. So all in all, coming back to this position, g6 is a very good weapon against the London system, or should I call it London defense. And as Korchnoi pointed out in his game against Polugaevsky in 1984, you can aim for this idea of c5, bishop e2, c takes d4, c takes d4, e takes d4, bishop e6, with the plan of queen b6, knight c6, and rook c8. And you should be good to go and should have never any problems against the London system. And I hope this will help you get this problem out of your way. And Happy New Year's, everyone.